Micah K. Brown, thank you very much for joining me for Star Wars, How an Ineffective Data Governance Program Destroyed a Galactic Empire. You know, when I was going through and creating this talk, I didn't realize that there'd be two different Star Wars talks, so thank you very much for joining me today. A little bit about myself. I work for Munich Re as a security engineer too. I'm the vice president of the Greater Cincinnati ISSA chapter. If you want to learn more about us, we're free and open group of IT security practitioners. Please feel free to come and join our meetings. To go on, I've been leading a data loss prevention for over 4 years, and serendipity abides all because today was my last day officially on a DLP project. So there will be some revelry tonight, I guarantee. That being said, I also have my CISSP. I'm a Raspberry Pi enthusiast, as well as a huge IndyCar fan. True story. I've actually been in this city for the past 4 consecutive weeks. It's wonderful. Most of my friends, they absolutely love this little key factoid that one of my 2018 goals was to learn to cook brisket like a Texan. And I continued that on with this year's goal to continue to cook brisket like a Texan, hence the smoker's jacket. Actually, I did. For tomorrow, for those that wish, we are holding a meetup. We're going to be over in that area over there about 7 o'clock. If you want to come and hang out, learn about local Cincinnati IT security groups, and eat a little bit of pulled pork, everyone's invited while supplies last. This is not the hero of the rebellion that allowed the Rebel Alliance to go through and survive the Battle of Yavin. While Luke's most actions are definitely heroic, if the rebels did not go through and acquire the Death Star plans, either through the old mythology laid out in Dark Forces or the new Rogue One mythology, I assert that the Rebel Alliance would not have survived the Battle of Yavin 4. Also, let's be honest, Chewbacca, he deserved a medal. My proof? Guys, it's right here in the opening crawl. During the battle, rebel spies managed to steal secret plans to the Empire's ultimate weapon, the Death Star, an armored space station with enough power to destroy an entire planet. So, where do we need to go through and look for the true hero that allowed the Rebel Alliance to go through and to survive the Battle of Yavin? An ancient alien astronaut might theorize that this very well could be the identification. Like most of us, he's a common everyday IT security practitioner, data analyst that struggles to find a work-life balance. He struggles to get the correct tools, resources, and visibility to do their job and protect his galactic empire. He has daily challenges separating the signal from the jam. He's responsible for articulating deeply technical issues such as the bleeps, the sweeps, and the creeps to others. And he has challenged communicating gaps and concerns to the imperial officers, i.e. senior management. This guy, he also deserves a medal. That being said, this is the point in the talk where we take a hard right turn and we go into a full-out data governance talk. So this is your one warning. If this talk is not for you, I completely understand it. We are all going through and sacrificing our time being here. I want you to get the most out of this conference. So if you do want to leave, you're not going to hurt my feelings. I want you to maximize your Circle City Con experience. But what is data governance? So quite frankly, data governance means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So I'm not going to read each and every one of these slides. In fact, my slide deck is free and available on my GitHub, just github.com/Micah K. Brown. I make all of my talks public source, so please feel free to go through and to download them, use, abuse them any way that you care. But I pulled 4 different major organizations. So Wikipedia, the Data Governance Professional Organization, IBM, and NITS for what their definition of data governance actually is. And what's interesting is we can clearly see that there are some similarities, but there's some differences. So data governance means different things to different organizations. One organization's data governance program is going to be completely different than another. Data governance allows the business to decide what data governance means for itself. It involves people, processes, and technology, but maybe not in that specific order. Data governance allows the business to make strategic decisions on how data is stored, processed, transmitted, and accessed within its own environment, and when working correctly, should go through and augment the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data to authorized users. Quite simply, data governance is how we decide how to decide. So I stole this slide blatantly from a NIST document that I was reading, and I put the URL there at the bottom, and I absolutely love it because it shows when we're talking about data governance, we're talking about the 10,000-foot view. We're talking about the strategies of how we tackle data type issues. So that's really the big takeaway. So, true story, I created most of this presentation while I was visiting Austin, Texas for the IndyCar race. And I was sitting by a lovely little river, and I started to work on this. And my question is why does my organization have a data governance program? And my ultimate assumption is because we have rules, laws, regulation, and contractual requirements that force key players to actually, such as in this case, it's our business management, our IT security, legal, it could be more, it could be less, it could be different groups, to create a formal data governance program. That data governance program should go through and it should maximize the ownership of the data, the accessibility of data, the overall security of data, the integrity of data, as well as make sure that the organizations knows what type of data they are going through and they're collecting, that they are storing, that they are processing, that they're transmitting. Now, out of those tenet goals, we can create policies, processes, and procedures that are then turned around and used by what I've termed as actionable data governance tools and techniques. So, what are the goals of the data governance program? They should enable better decision making. They should reduce operational friction. They should train our managers and our staffs to go through and adopt common approaches when working with data day in and day out. They should build standards and repeatable processes, reduce the cost, and ensure transparency on anything that we are doing within our environment. Pretty lofty goals, pretty good reason why many organizations are really starting to beef up their data governance programs. So, what I wanted to do was I wanted to come up with a generic term, so I'm using actionable data governance tools to be a collection of tools, technologies, and controls that we can place in our environment to go through and to basically enforce decisions that are coming out of our data or our data governance program. So this could be a simple permit, a permit with a special encryption, or a condition such as a digital signature or encryption of the file or the data, a permit with justification, a permit with an alert, a deny with an alert, a deny without an alert, or it could be very others. And I just want to give you kind of an idea of what I was trying to go through. And of course, we need to go through and apply. These tools need to cover how we store, how we process, how we transmit, as well as how we go through and assert our identity and how we are accessing that data. So, who are the players? And at first I was like, okay, it's pretty simple. There's the data owner, there's the data user. But now, more and more important, keep in mind, I'm working for a global organization. So I'm seeing a lot of the actual impacts of those rules, laws, and regulations that we heard in our opening keynote address, which was absolutely awesome. So things such as GDPR, the New York DFS, the California Consumer Privacy Act are really going through and making the data subject, the person on whose data we are collecting their information, we're giving them a lot of power. But other players are senior management, risk management, legal and compliance, auditors, both internal and external, IT security, IT delivery, third parties, and partners. Now, if you ever worked with me, you'll get sick to death of this one statement that I constantly make. You see, we've been going through and we've been creating things like IDS, IPS, DLP, CASB for a long time. And when we go through and we just assign some detection to be a false positive, we're doing ourselves a disservice because what we're doing is saying we do not have confidence in our tools. And so I've looked at thousands over the past 4 years of DLP events. And when many members of my team would say, well, that's just a false positive, I'd say, no, that's a poorly written rule. Many times when I see a true false positive, it's actually the result of a bug. But when we go through and we just throw around the word false positive, we're just eroding the trust in the systems that we're going through and maintaining and protecting. So instead, what I did was very early on, I went through and I adopted an accuracy versus validity, where accuracy is the detection mathematically true, and validity is, did we get the desired result? So I can have a detection of a credit card that when I look at the actual rules, how we defined that classification, when I run it through the actual input, I can have something that is mathematically accurate, but it's actually in a URL for something like LinkedIn, and therefore not a credit card, even if it passes the lung check. So this would be something where we have high accuracy, low validity, but what that automatically does is that underlines to my team, well, wait a minute, this isn't that the tool stinks, it's that we need to work on refining our data classifications, and it's building trust and creating a proactive engagement versus the general trap of the false positive. And as my good friend InfoSec Benjamin Desari would say, there's lies, damned lies, and spreadsheets. So let's get started. Now, one thing that I've recently started to really champion within my work is that the policy architecture, how we go through and implement our controls, should have the same basic framework. So in my environment, I implement everything as a global or regional or organizational, that I can apply a policy on any one of those 3 tiers. And it's actually gone through and it's done a lot to simplify how we go through and we build our systems, how we maintain, how we support, how we create exceptions. And once again, all of these slides are out on my GitHub, 100% free, clear. Take them, use them, abuse them. And now, how many of you are familiar with the CIS Top 20? I love it, guys. I love how it breaks things down into, here are the basic controls that you should tackle first. Here are the fundamental. Here are the organizationals. And so I wanted to do the same thing for this talk in terms of these actionable data governance tools. Now, of course, any of those in the blue, those are the actual technologies that we're going to talk about for the rest of this talk. And they need to go through, support, augment, enforce our existing policies, which I'm showing on the right. Now this slide, this took me a while to wrap my head around, so I want to walk you through it. What I'm trying to show is those gray boxes, those are the types of access that we might be or the type of assets that we might be asked to go through and apply policies or controls on. Up at the top in the green, that's the level of general administration or authority that we have on those systems. And then once again, I carried along blue being the actual tools so that you can kind of see where those tools, where they lie on the different types of assets. I then went through, and this is a generalization depending on the tool. It might have this functionality, it might not, but I tried to show where we could go through and apply different types of actions amongst these tools. So the basic controls, the first and foremost is our traditional network infrastructure, guys. One of the hardest things that I have to do as a global organization is the simple things at scale. So I've got a friend in local Cincinnati, and they are in the same vertical that I am, and their business went through and did an evaluation that the real risk to cloud storage was not people downloading files from those public cloud storage sites. It was the upload. In fact, there was a real business need for people to be able to go through and to download from those sites as they were working on claims and policies. And so what they did was pretty simple. They worked with their network proxy team, and they turned those cloud storage sites to download only. Flash forward a couple months later, it just stopped working. And they raised a ticket, and they went through and they found significant resistance in reestablishing that already agreed upon control. So we need, whenever we put in a control, a technology, we should always go through and either set a manual, this is how we're going to validate that it works, or even better if we can automate it so if it breaks, that we can go through and we can address it in a timely manner with the correct groups. So with that, we'll go to file, disk encryption, and key management. When it comes to any type of encryption, It's only as strong as your key management. And really, when it comes to encryption, key management is often one of the weaker underbellies, and it's definitely bit me in the behind a couple of times. We see that within our industries that the thought of encrypting the root drive of our user devices, it's becoming commonplace. It's becoming commonplace in even consumer devices. But unfortunately, I have a situation in which there are certain countries in which I am not able to deploy what we would consider to be best of breed local drive encryption. So keep in mind that some countries you are not able to go through and to deploy strong full disk encryption. Also, if you are going through and looking at doing full disk encryption, just know that if you go through and enable something like FIPS 140, that you might lose some of the functionality within your systems. Encrypting files written to portable media might be a popular decision from a business perspective, but prepare for pushback from our users. When we went through and switched from one portable media encryption technology to another, it actually went through and had some unintended consequences where it actually broke some of our current business processes, and those business processes either needed to be changed or we needed to create a suitable exception. We also need to take care not to brick non-company owned devices, as well as when we're talking about encrypting files at the network share level, we need to make sure that A, it makes sense, and B, that we have a proper method to go through and make it easy for users to go through and to get the keys that they need to do those actions that they are authorized to do. File and integrity monitoring. This is a great tool. Basically, it's a piece of software. Usually they'll go through and it'll scan a data repository and it'll report back to you on things like the state of the files, who's going through and interacting with those files, what actions are they taking on them. You can also go through and create some pretty cool alerts reports. Many of them have an automatic functionality to go through and to audit both your file and your share access control lists for gaps and even make recommendations to clean them up. Many of them also have a way to go through and to automate your end user provisioning to make it much more of a workflow-like system. Very cool. We can also go through and see that many of these technologies are building DLP Discover Lite types of services within them. We'll touch on that a little bit later. But one of the cool things is one of my good friends got hit by a ransomware virus, and he was able to go to one of these file integrity monitor tools, and he is able to simply do a search across his entire enterprise and determine where each one of those or files that had a certain encryption. That way he had a report. It took him about 5 to 10 minutes to run, and he could turn that over to their backup and restoration team. It saved their bacon. So I strongly advocate that this is a great basic control. So let's go to the foundational controls. Once we get the basics under wraps, what should we be thinking about? Well, the first is mobile device management. Originally, we saw mobile device management come from the bring your own device or a non-trusted external device type of group. Anymore, what I'm doing a lot with MDM technologies is non-default corporate assets. So, for example, we go through and use a lot of Wintel machines. And so to go through and apply suitable controls to reduce the risk to something like an Apple or a Linux that is owned by the organization, we're using an MDM functionality. MDMs provide the ability to apply rich policy attributes to client systems that we might have little to no authority on, which make them a very compelling technology. In the case of where we're going through and we're doing BYOD and non-trusted external devices, we must always respect that the owner of that device is sovereign on that device. We are just providing them a service that they can opt out into or out of at any time based on whatever our enrollment, de-enrollment policies are. And remember that enrollment is just as critical as de-enrollment. Now, we need to go through and make sure that we explain what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what capabilities them enrolling into our system is giving us. as well as be open and transparent on what we could do. When it comes to MDM, there's a lot of players in this space, from open source to closed source. So just go through, do your research, and find out which MDM type of device could meet your use cases. And also be sensitive to the additional overhead that you're adding to your end users' devices. So identity and access management. I struggled in putting this one on. From one hand, from a strict data governance tool, I can mathematically argue that no, it's not. However, I would counteract that by saying that many of our actionable data governance tools are going through and functioning off of the basic assumption that the actual user account, computer account that we see making some sort of action is in truth by that source user or computer account. In taking a look at a lot of the talks that I've been seeing over 2-3 years, I see a lot of movement on the red teams, on the purple teams, to co-opting actual computer accounts. We've gotten pretty good at locking down the user accounts, but these computer accounts, they are very widely trusted within our organizations. And quite frankly, the red teamers and purple teamers are running wild with them. Many other talks have gone through and asserted that Active Directory is insecure by default. And I've added 3 different links here that you can go through and you can read if you're not familiar with this school of thought. And truthfully, there are many good points there. However, what I have gone through and what I have seen is that those organizations that want to address these types of challenges, they generally have to do an entire forest migration. And let me tell you, having been a part of a couple of those, it is not a fun task. It is pain personified that might only be eclipsed by DLP. Data classification. How do you know what data you care about as an organization? So there's 2 real good schools of thought. So there's traditional data classification, which is built off of things like text dictionaries, regular expressions, pattern matching, and some Boolean logic that's salted on. But that has some challenges. So, there's multiple different versions of regex, and oftentimes it's difficult to go through and to translate the rules from one scan engine to another. You might get them close, but you'll never, ever, ever get them exact. And that can cause some real problems. The second popular opinion is many common Office applications now allow you to allow your actual users, when they save a document, when they create a new document, to apply a meta tag, a simple code that's stored in the header or metadata of your documents that aligns with your data's own data classification. So within our organization, we have classifications X0 through X5. And so when a user goes through and they save a common Office application, they are prompted, do you wish to go through, or what classification? And it has a quick description that if a user hovers over that description, they'll get an expanded guided. Now, guys, that might sound hokey, but it's really powerful, because if you think about it, every time a user is working with the document, we are going through and we're asking them, hey, what's the most sensitive? We're training them as they go. And I have seen a real uptick in our users being better data custodians just simply because of this project. And what's great about this, guys, is that these tags that they're writing in the document headers, any program, application, service account user that has access to go through and to look at the document headers, they can go through and they can read that, and they can then build their actions off of that. So it's not that one is better than the other. I think they both complement each other, and we've gotten a lot of really good forward progress by going through and utilizing both. So, traditional data classification, guys. In the United States, we have 50 different states. And in my DLP, which I will show you, our regular expression dictionary, we have 26 different regular expressions in our regular expression dictionary. Also, the books of faces, the ends of links, many of our social media accounts use a 15 to 16 digit character number to index content. What does that look like, guys? That's a credit card. In fact, I've even gone through and I've run some of those detections through lung checks, And I've actually found that yes, they are, from a lung check perspective, they could be considered valid credit cards. But that's not what they are to us. They are simply URLs. So this calls into question, how can we make our traditional data classifications better? And one of the simple rules is to follow the first rule of improv comedy. Whenever you're building your classifications, always go through and say yes and. Now, if you are in DLP, I'm sorry. But I do have, if you're DLP curious, I've got a DLP talk from last year that is out on my GitHub. I'd urge you to go through and take a look at that. That summarizes about 4 years of knowledge about DLP and some of the challenges that we have faced with it. And I truly believe that every challenge that we've faced with DLP has been a function of how my organization chose to implement and attack DLP versus a flaw with whatever vendor we are going through and using. Likewise, when we go through and we blend the meta tag data with traditional DLP classifications, that's when things really get exciting and we really go through and start providing value to our teams, not only to our teams, but to the business, which is ultimately, as an IT security practitioner, as a blue teamer, that's what I'm there to do. I'm there to add value, not to subtract value from the organization. And finally, when it comes to building your classification, proximity classifications are really powerful. This is where you're looking for condition A plus condition B within so many characters of each other. Oops. So guys, I promised you, here is the regular expression for how I define a driver's license in my environment. Now, the problem was 26 different positive matches, but then we had some matches around things like our user IDs, things like our change tickets, our problem tickets, our quality control tickets, something even as simple as a year, month, day, or day, month, year, time code, flagged as a driver's license. Now, I go into a little bit on how we solve this in my DLP talk. I'll urge you, we can talk definitely anytime during this conference, or you can download that and you can reach out to me through the ends of links, through the Twitters, and we can go through and we can have a talk on that. But now let's talk about the organizational controls. Now keep in mind, this is what I would consider to be the gold standard of the actual actionable data governance controls that we could implement. So the first thing is my arch nemesis, DLP. Now, DLP is a collection of tools and technologies that goes through and allows us to create rules, policies on how data is stored, processed, or transmitted within our environment. So the very first one is the DLP client. This is a little agent that sits on your laptop that goes through and enforces policies on how your users are going through and interacting with data. In truth, my organization, or actually my DLP client, has 13 different rules that I could actually go through and build. In truth, I've only enabled one. I've only found one of those 13 that adds value to my organization. Your mileage may vary, but just keep that in mind. DLP network. So this is much like our traditional IDS IPS. You set it off of a span port, a network tap, a port aggregator, or you put it in line. But instead of going through and looking for indicators of compromise through malicious traffic, instead what you're going through and what you're looking for is quite simply sensitive data traversing that line. DLP repository scanner, this is usually an agent that you install on a server or a VM that you spin up in your VM environment. And all it does is it reaches out to a certain data repository and it scans all of the files and data there, and it returns a report or incident of where we think, based on your classifications, the actual sensitive data in your environment is. The DLP email, quite simply, this is usually a piece of software or a server that partners with your mail server to do inspection on incoming and outgoing. Now, guys, I had to fight to go through and to scan email that was coming into our organization. Why do I care? Well, yeah, my primary care is on things going out, but And I would agree that in order to be a good data custodian, I must first go through and receive the data before I can actually be a custodian. But if I see a problem with data coming into my organization, I want to be alerted so that I can reach out to that group and I can say, hey, my name's Micah, I'm from IT security, let me help you. So that's actually been a big win, and we've been able to close a couple of gaps. DLP Web, much like DLP Email, the DLP Web server goes through and talks with your web proxy, and it does DLP scans on any traffic coming into or out of your environment. I love that bidirectional for the exact same reason. And then we have the DLP Management Console, guys, and this is one of the most critical parts. Quite frankly, this is the puppet master. This is the orchestrator of all of the other parts of a proper DLP environment. But guys, it's also one of the most sensitive parts. So we need to make sure that we go through and protect this. Because think about it. Every time we get an alert, we create a DLP incident. That DLP incident is going to have the metadata, the who, what, where, when, why, how. But it's also going to go through and include an evidence file, a copy of the sensitive information. So guys, let me put on my inner black hat. If I got access to the DLP Management Console, I know that I'm going to go through and see a lot of very sensitive information as defined by the business. And not only am I going to get primary copies of that evidence file, but I'm also going to go through and get secondary information, like if it was interacting with a file on the share, I'll know the exact path. And guys, if I find in this folder, HR folder over here, one document with sensitive information, chances are pretty good that I'm going to find other sensitive data. So we need to make sure that we really pay attention to how we secure our DLP Management Console. Now, one of the dirty little secrets is the DLP client can overlap with a lot of different functionality of the other parts. My personal view is I like to keep my client as lean and clean as possible, because in my organization, it's always DLP's fault. Generally, it's not. But the assumption is that it is. So the DLP client with a sufficiently advanced and aggressive policy can definitely go through and can affect a computer's compute cost. CPU, memory, disk I/O, network I/O. That's why we use an application within our test environment, DLP, where it grabs every so often, it'll pull per process compute cost and actually save it out. So we have mathematical evidence whether going through and implementing a change actually had a negative experience within our test environment. Second thing you're going to find is that there are going to be incompatibilities with local software. So guys, I love Google Chrome, but Google is very protective of their Chrome browser, right? And so the first time that my DLP vendor gets the new version of Chrome is the very first time that my users get that exact same. So what actually happened a couple years ago is all of a sudden Chrome just stopped working in my environment. Now guys, if I were to play the traditional IT security guy and say, well, excuse me, I understand that you like Chrome, but our officially supported internet browser is Internet Explorer. How many friends am I going to win? So this is where we decided to go through and to move our web inspection off of the client and move it up to a DLP web type device. So just keep that in mind. Other things that we saw was our developers, things like their development tools was causing excessive CPU spikes. So we had to create what in our environment is called trusted application templates to basically say, hey, DLP, you can ignore these specific executables. And that really helps solve things up. Other challenges is the client must be connected to go through and to get updates. Guys, I work for an insurance agency. A lot of our guys and gals are remote. And I have a certain number of road warriors that take actual pride in not logging into the corporate network. So that's not a data governance issue, but in terms of getting policies to those guys, that can be an organizational challenge. It's kind of like those old screenshots that you saw where a certain Linux server has been up for, multiple years. Interesting. And finally, you need to make sure that your DLP client is on all of the client system that's supposed to be. In my organization, that is a challenge. It's one of those simple things, logistically, that is hard to do at scale. So we've had to go through and create a myriad of both manual and automated tasks to help us identify that. Likewise, the DLP network can go through and overlap with the systems such as DLP email and DLP web, depending on where you're going and inspecting. If that is a challenge, or if you do have an overlap there, my suggestion is pick the correct tool and then try to filter out that overlap, because it does not do any good to create 5 incidents for the same action. Finally, I once again brought up that the DLP management console, it's a high-value target, so we have to make sure that we protect it as required by any rules, laws, regulations, or contractual agreements. And finally, many different products are adding DLP-like functionality. So we need to make, as an organization, a stand whether we're going to be a mono DLP scan engine shop, or are we going to pick best-of-breed features from multiple different products. I can tell you that my organization, originally, we were going to be the mono scan policy. We're not anymore. And so that causes rule fragmentation, and I go all into the ramifications of that in my other talk, and I'd love to talk to you outside of here in LobbyCon or offline about that. Finally, CASB. If you were to ask me a couple of years ago, I'd say that CASB was kind of like cutting edge, bleeding edge. More, I think it's actually gone through and it's matured quite a bit. So this allows you to do DLP-like functionality within a cloud environment. And generally, I've seen 2 strategies when it comes to CASB. So the first side is the on-site, where you're going through and you're tapping in line with your with your internet gateway. Now, the challenge with an online deployment, because there's good and there's bad to it, is that since you are in line, you have to go through and give that CASB some way to go through and to cryptographically break into your actual encrypted sessions to the web traffic to the cloud environment. So this is usually done through going through and establishing certificate chaining. The one warning I will give you is whenever you're doing that, that does leave you to crypto downgrade vulnerabilities. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying make sure that you are doing it correctly and that you are retaining the integrity of your default encryption stats. There was one of my friends who really got bit by that. The great thing about the on-premises is as long as your users' traffic is flowing out your internet gateways, not only are you going to see what they are doing in your authorized clouds, but also in your unauthorized clouds. However, the weakness of this model is once your users are out of your office and no longer going through your primary internet gateways, you lose all of that telemetry. So it's kind of a trade-off. Versus there are cloud-based CLASB solutions where you grant a cloud-based CASB provider the ability to look into your authorized cloud storage, and then you can do DLP-like functionality, scans, blocks, alerts within your authorized cloud environment. However, in this second environment, you're going to go through and you're going to miss everything that is not your authorized clouds. True story. Within Munich Re, our current stance is that access to consumer cloud storage is not allowed. However, a certain cloud service provider had the gumption to go through and to scrape their database and send a nice email to one of our senior execs saying, we are currently hosting this much data. That's led to some interesting conversations. So usually I would assert that you probably need a mix of the 2 of these in order to fully go through and to address cloud. Finally, digital rights management. So digital rights management lets a data owner go through and to mathematically program what other users are allowed to do with their data. Usually this is through some sort of encryption wrapper and authentication type of wrapper installed over a document. And it is very divisive within IT security, and there are proponents on both sides. We often saw this included in music, in videos, in text, in ebooks. And truth be told, within the hacker community, it has been celebrated to go through and to crack DRM. This is true with what we saw in DVD, in Blu-ray, in Apple's Fair Play. This is why Amazon and Apple now for their music, it's DRM free, so you can use it once you buy it. You can use it anywhere. So we have to acknowledge when it comes to DRM, there are many tools, techniques, tactics that are already defined. Also, something as simple as a ping home. Guys, you need to get your legal team in on that, because I've been advised by several credible legal members that that might be less than desirable and could put your organization in some sort of gray area. So always bring your legal team in when you're doing DRM and you're saying this is what we would like to do. So wrapping it up, what I tried to do in this slide, and I know it's hard to read, that's why I make my slides free on my GitHub, is I tried to go through and compare and contrast what each of these controls did and what they can allow you to do. As well as this side is great in kind of comparing and contrasting. And the last thing that I want to leave you with, Cincinnati is a great city. We've got a great group of many IT security groups that work together to provide training, education, and some cheeky fun to our members. If you're ever in Cincinnati, we would love to have you at one of our events. There, please feel free to come by and to give us a try. And ultimately, my challenge is to you is to find those groups, find those people that can be your support system, that can help you out, whether it's here, whether it's there. It really is easier when we all work together. And with that, thank you very much. And any questions?
I'll answer your question. Have you looked at CMMI's data maturity model?
So, no, I have not. I probably should have included that in my research.
Okay, definitely worth taking a look at.
Will do.
I think it might add some interesting color to what you're doing.
Okay, excellent. Remember, 7 o'clock, over in somewhere in that area, free table, free pulled pork, as long as it lasts. Tomorrow. I've got to cook it tonight. Tomorrow at 7 p.m. Thank you.